Hey guys, Atsu here, and today I wanted to just take a moment to talk to you guys about something that seemingly has upset a lot of people, seemingly has made a lot of people uncomfortable with my channel, and seemingly has triggered a lot of people or just irritated a lot of people, and that is the way I pronounce certain characters' names. For example, Kandake and Seno. Now, before we get into this, for the cynical people, this video is not monetized. I do these things from time to time, but I would like to use my platform to have a productive conversation. By the way, if I keep looking over there, it's because my game monitor is over there, and I'm kind of curious to see what happens if the Hilly Charles actually destroy this little floaty thing for Legoff, who has bothered me many times. So, the names Kandake, Seno are not the only example in Genshin Impact English dub where the names have been butchered. I would say, for example, Klee is not actually Klee, it's more like Clay. It's German for clover. Tartaglia gets pronounced as Tartaglia, even though it's an Italian name from Italian theatre. In fact, all of the characters from the Fatui are from Italian theatre, believe it or not. Yes, I know they are based on like Russians, but yes, the Fatui are Italian. I know it doesn't make sense, but many things in Genshin Impact don't really make sense. One of the more egregious ones is Tainari. It's really not anywhere near Tainari, but it's closer to Tignari. And I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly because I can't speak Arabic, but the thing is, that is as close as in English you can get to it. So there is an argument where people make that, oh, it's impossible for us to say XYZ name because it's not in our language, but when you go to the basic phonetics, it's really not that difficult to not say Tainari and just say Tignari, which is infinitely closer. And it would be kind of like saying that, oh, I can't say the name Jesus. For some reason, I have to say it as Jesus, like Jesusi Baka. And it doesn't really make any sense to do that. Now, this video is not for me to hear or for me to be here to tell you how to say certain things or to preach to you guys. This is the only correct way to do XYZ. This video is here to try and ease people's concerns of why I'm saying certain names this way, because it's my choice and I want to the best of my ability, try and be as phonetically accurate as possible while respecting the cultures and the languages that these names come from. As someone who has had the name Atsu and still to this day gets the name Atsu absolutely butchered. I get Astro is the most egregious one. That's the most annoying one when people say Astro. And it's like, how do you get Astro? And then you have Asto, Astu, Atso, and there's just so many ways people get my name wrong. And for me, like, I really don't get it, but I feel like I should be able to get it that some people are just that bad when it comes to saying names. Like, they are just that inept at being able to say Atsu, even though, to me, it's kind of crazy. And yes, I know some people say Atsu. Atsu is fine as well. It's basically close enough to the Japanese way of saying Atsu, which is how it is in Japanese. So when you move it over to English, it's essentially pretty much, it's not one-to-one, but it's close enough. And this is where I think it gets a little bit, see, I want to use and pick my words wisely because I know some people will, regardless of what I say, take offense to this. And I want to make it clear that whatever I say in this video is, there is no intention whatsoever to be offensive or to offend anyone. Again, this is just me personally explaining from my point of view why I think a certain way and how I conduct myself as such. And again, this is not a way of me saying you should do this, but maybe it's a way of me hoping that it might open some people's minds or perceptions on why names might be important. At the very least, in my Asian culture, names are an important thing, and I think in a lot of cultures that aren't English or American English, that names are actually quite important and they typically have a meaning behind them. So butchering names is not as small of an issue as people think, and this isn't just limited to Genshin Impact, by the way. I should have stressed that at the beginning of the video, but this is not like something that's just tied to Genshin Impact. For me, ever since I became a content creator, I always try my best to say names correctly of my viewers, of my audience, of you guys, my peers, my friends, etc., because I know how annoying it can get when people get your name wrong. And again, I know people are going to be like, this is a fictional game, it's a fictional representation, it doesn't matter. And this is where I slightly disagree. Like, if you're going to take names or words from certain other cultures or languages, the very least that I expect from you is to be able to try your best to phonetically adapt to that. For example, Tignari is one of the better examples in the Arabic language. I can't say it properly, but it's closest to Tignari in English. How that gets changed into Tainari, I don't really understand that. And this is where I would say a lot of people have this argument of, oh, you're now disrespecting the developers of Genshin Impact. You're disrespecting the people that work on the game because you're not pronouncing it the way that they pronounce it. And for me, again, this is kind of a little bit hypocritical, because if the English dub staff or the people or the one person in charge of deciding how certain characters' names are said just got it correct in the first place, I don't think we'd even be having this conversation in the first place. And this is where you can look at, for example, the other languages and see there actually is no consistency between how they're getting dubbed. And what I would like to point to is the Japanese dub. The Japanese dub does, I think, a pretty good job of trying to be as culturally accurate as possible when it comes to borrowing words or borrowing names from other languages. For example, it's not Sino there, it's Seno. And Seno, or Sino, or even Kino, depending on how you want to go about it, as Zhongli is about to get destroyed by the Hilichurls, is as close as you can really get to the way of saying it in Greek or Arabic. Greek would be Kino, and I've been told in Arabic there's two ways to say. You can either go for Sino, it depends if you're part of the side of like the Middle Eastern side, or if you're part of like North Africa. In North Africa, supposedly it's closer to actually Seno. What there isn't though is Sino. That is not a thing. That is the anglicized version. And when you anglicize something, you're basically converting it into white English or white American English, or essentially white Western culture. So you are kind of just butchering the name. Most of the time, it's just because one person decided, oh, I don't want to do my research, and this is just convenient for me to just say it like that. They say it like that, then it spreads to everybody else, which again, I think is a little bit inconsiderate and slightly disrespectful. That's not to say you're a bad person. I just would wish that some people would do a little bit more research when it came to these things. The other examples would be Klee. In Japanese dub is Kure. And in German, which is where the word and the name is from, it means clover is, again, closer to clay. The Japanese version has done a pretty good job in that case. The other one is Tartaglia. It's not actually pronounced Tartaglia, it's closer to Tartaglia with a silent G. And again, I know I can't say it properly because it's in Italian and there is a special sound in Italian, but it is closer to the silent G. And in Japanese, they say Tarutaria, which again, they could say Tarutaguria, but they don't because they know in Italian, it's actually closer to Tarutaria or Tartaglia. And again, this is the same thing with a lot of different names that have been borrowed from non-overlapping cultures. And when I say overlapping cultures, I mean like Chinese and Japanese. They're overlapping cultures, which is why certain names like Zhongli and Shorli are different, even though the spelling is the same. Literally, the language, the kanji are the same, and there's different ways to read those. And there's a lot of history and nuance behind Chinese and Japanese. So that's a little bit of a special case. But when it comes to borrowing names from certain cultures, I would say the Japanese dub is one of the best places to look at it. They do, however, again, they're not flawless. They do, however, say kandake as kandisu, which probably makes sense because maybe they didn't see the connection to the term kandake, which I will put on the screen here for you right now. This isn't a specific person, by the way. This is a title, and you can see that the word has been Latinized into Candice, but this is where, again, there's kind of a rebuttal for the argument of you should stick to the Latinized or the Romanized or the English or the Anglicized version. It's really not difficult to just get the phonetic pronunciation for a name somewhat accurate. And English, I don't know how to explain this, has absolutely no consistency whatsoever when it comes to pronunciation. There is no consistency in the English language whatsoever. So, for example, albedo could also be pronounced as albedo or albedo. And people wouldn't really bat an eye because it would still technically make sense in English. And then bedo, some people might say baidu or beidou. And again, in English, people wouldn't really bat an eye because it still technically makes sense. But does that make it culturally accurate? No. So that is one of the points I would like to point out. And again, it's not that big of a deal, guys, if you really don't want to try and put in any effort to try and get the names accurate. Like, it's not gonna ruin the world for anyone. It's not gonna be the end of the world for anyone. It's just kind of, how should I put this? For people who speak more than just English, or for people who come from different cultures and backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds, I can promise you that 95% of those people always, including myself, we will always appreciate it when someone that only speaks English or someone that doesn't speak the native language tries their best to be as accurate as possible. We always appreciate that. Now, there will be the few people who are like, oh, just sweep it under the rug. It doesn't matter. Who cares? And maybe they have a different kind of privilege, or maybe they have a different kind of background where they didn't have to deal with having their names mispronounced or having all their words butchered. But I would say, with a little bit of empathy and trying to understand where the other person is coming from, it can go a really long way. Like, people appreciate when you try to be as culturally accurate and respectful as possible. And that is my choice in why I say kandake and why I say seno, because for me, that is what I've been told, and that is what I have researched as the correct way to say the names phonetically, and I'm going to stick by them. Same thing with Tartaglia. Klee is the one I slip up on all the time. If you go through my videos, you'll see I say Klee or Clay, and there's like no consistency there. I am still kind of trying to get used to saying Clay. But of course, I know if I say that, a lot of people are going to grill me and they're going to be like, oh, you're so stupid, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, I just think that if you have been told, or if you've been taught how to say a certain name a certain way and culturally accurate, to then ignore that is a little bit disrespectful. That's how I personally feel about it. I don't look down on anyone that doesn't pronounce names correctly. Neko P, my wife, doesn't take this as seriously as I do. She doesn't really care that much. Same thing as like almost all of my content creator names. I see them butcher names all the time, and it doesn't really bother me. What bothers me is when I still try and make the effort and people complain about it. If I make the effort, it really shouldn't affect you in any way, in a negative way, in any way, shape, or form. And if it annoys you, I apologize, but that is how the name should be pronounced to the best of my own ability anyway. And if that's something that upsets you and you don't want to watch my videos anymore, that's totally okay. But that is just my 2 cents on the issue, and I think it just shows a little bit of extra respect that sometimes isn't as obvious. And this is not like a video in order to send hate to the person in charge of the English dub. Yes, I don't think whoever the people are in charge of the English dub, I think they are doing quite a terrible job when it comes to localization. But, you know, there's like how, for example, is Hoyoverse really meant to know? You know, like if their main language is Chinese and most of their staff don't speak super fluent or native English that is very westernized, how are they really meant to know whether the English dub is right or wrong, right? They're trusting a professional, and the professional has a duty to do their job to the best of their abilities. Do I think they're doing the research to the best of their abilities? I think that's a little bit questionable, and this is why I think the difference between Japanese and English dubs come into contest. And this isn't meant to be like a dub versus sub thing, but just objectively speaking, Japan has been in this industry infinitely longer than the West when it comes to voice acting, when it comes to just localizing into Japanese. They are so much more far advanced, and this is why I think the Japanese dub has done a much better job of trying to be as culturally accurate as possible. And they have better solutions to certain things, like Mondstadt is going to be something really difficult to say in Japanese, which is why they only say Mondo, which is, again, to the best of their abilities, kind of like a compromise. So the examples that I've given you there, for example, Tignari, Sano, Kandake, Clay, Tartaglia, these are like phonetically the closest ways to say certain names, but they're all being butchered. They all come from different cultural backgrounds, and the English dub has completely flopped with them. Again, if you want to still pronounce them as Tainari, Sino, Candice, Klee, Tartaglia, that's your choice. But the knowledge is there for you now. You now know I've told you this. Whether you believe me or not is up to you. Whether you want to change based on that, that's up to you. And I will not crucify you if you don't want to change, okay? Let me show you this clip that Now, I'm sure Enviosity, one of my good friends, doesn't want me to show you, but it is so funny. It genuinely is so funny.
We're going to singles now.
Just hear this, okay? This is Envy.
Who's it going to be this time?
At the beginning of the game.
Who are we going to pull this time? Imagine if it's another King Shui.
Yes.
Oh, it's a 4-star.
You heard that correctly. He used to say King Shui. He now says Sing Cho or Sing Chu, which is way, way, way more closer to the correct pronunciation in Mandarin Chinese. But he used to say King Shui. And yeah, it's hilarious. But obviously he changed it because he realized, oh, I'm so far off how it's meant to be pronounced. So that's just an example. And again, like Envy still says a ton of names incorrectly. I still say a ton of names incorrectly. But I think the fine line here is the intention, right? Like once you know how to say a certain name, if you choose to keep mispronouncing it, that kind of makes you a little bit of a douchebag because you're being a little bit disrespectful and inconsiderate. If you really didn't know or you're just culturally ignorant, I think that's totally okay. If your intention is still to try your best to pronounce these names, I think people really do appreciate that. And yeah, I can't believe I spent like 17 minutes talking about this because ultimately, I personally am not that bothered about it. What just bothers me is when people get upset when I'm just trying to do what I think is the right thing and the more respectful thing. So if you have any thoughts and opinions on that, please do share them with me. I'm just trying to check my bullet point list here to see if I looked at everything. I guess the example that I forgot to mention where it helps you have a little bit more understanding is like if we take the name Jesus, which is quite an important name in the Western world, and then suddenly the English dub decided it was now Jesus. I think a lot of people will disagree with that. And they'll be like, no, I'm not going to pronounce the name Jesus just because the game pronounces it Jesus when clearly it's Jesus. You know, and I think that applies to a lot of the names that have been mispronounced in the English dub. Same thing with like James. If, for example, the English staff decided to add a character called James, but except his name was Jammies, really doesn't make any sense. And why would you follow that pronunciation when it's so incredibly wrong phonetically just because one person working at HoYoverse decided to make that mistake? So that is my point overall. I hope you guys have something to say because I do think this is a topic worth discussing. It's not a topic that's going to really change anybody's mood, I think, other than a few people who are very angry at me. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I hope it has been insightful. I know I ramble on a lot with these kind of things, so they're normally always one take and unfiltered. So yeah, that's why. I apologize if I'm not very coherent with this stuff, but thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and bye-bye.